Welcome to Psychologist Talks. Today we're going to be talking about framing. And this is going to be framing from a clinical lens and less of from a leadership lens. So I'm going to have a separate episode focusing a little bit more on a leadership ideology. Today more from a clinical focus. Now, framing, some folks might not be familiar with this term. It's very psychodynamic in its origins, and it's meant to set up an imagery that's relatively accessible. Now, the two kind of metaphor imageries that I use is either the frame of a house or a frame of a say a painting or something. So we'll get into that in a moment. But the idea is it's talking about the expectations of therapy. And a lot of folks, they just kind of forge into therapy. And this is both because the clients themselves, people coming in to see us, are just like, hey, I'm here, help. But also therapists and providers, they will, and we can collude with this idea of like, well, you're here, here's the problem, here's what I'm going to offer. Instead of slowing down, with all the disclosure statements and the intake paperwork and all this other stuff that most of us have, unless we're, doing private practice and not taking insurance. That we forget to slow down and say, before we launch into this and we start building this house or painting this painting, we need to have a conversation about what to expect. So this is, and early theorists, the people who are offering this, they argue, and I would agree, it's one of the most important things that we do in our work. It is what launches our work into something that is meaningful, and it mitigates and prevents, I shouldn't say prevents, it mitigates the likelihood that it'll turn into a less successful outcome. And the reason for this is when we set up the frame, and we're like, this is the house we're going to build, right? So these are the outer frames, so we're not like going to do an add-on all of a sudden, right? This is what we're agreeing to, or here's how big the canvas is, and here's the materials we're going to work with. Cool. And that means that it gives us a set of optimal, a set that we're working with that'll provide a most optimal outcome. But what it also provides is what happens if we shift out of this. We get to the limits of the painting or the canvas, or someone brings in a totally different type of medium. We're like, whoa, what's this about? It's not inherently a bad thing all the time, but it is something worthy being curious about. It's like, I thought we were working with this, or the house. They're like, actually, I want to add a sunroom. You're like, well, hold on, let's talk about this. Like, I'm curious about a sunroom. Again, not inherently a bad thing, but sometimes the sunroom is a distraction from something else that's more important. So, it provides this sort of parameters for what we want to do and optimizes that as a possibly successful outcome. And then it allows us and explicitly says we need to talk about anytime the frame begins to shift, because now the expectations are changing. This is important for anybody. My argument is, I don't care if you're a strict behaviorist and you're just teaching skills. It's at least good to have a basic frame-based conversation. But it is beneficial, if not essential, for any depth-based work, and absolutely essential for any personality-focused work. The way I will often say, and why I do framing with everybody, one, I'm not a transactional therapist. I'm not doing CBT for insomnia or something, and so just kind of bear that in mind. I'm coming from a relational psychodynamic approach, and so I'm more process-oriented. So this is friendlier for process-oriented therapies, but again, applicable as much as you want it to be applicable. But I teach to, and I practice that I'm going to frame no matter who I'm meeting with. I don't care who it is. And the reason is that the worst case scenario is still a relatively positive outcome. A worst case scenario, you're agreeing to something that you and the person who's coming in with probably already agrees with. And so worst case, it's amplifying something that you both commonly value. Oh no, right? Like, oh no, you spent 15 minutes talking about this and it just, it embellishes an already possibly good process. But remember, you don't know that. There's no way for you as a client or me as a provider to know how this is going to go. Which is why the best case scenario of what you're doing is you're laying the groundwork to talk about expectations as therapy or as the intervention begins to inevitably evolve as time continues to transpire. It provides this coming back to, and instead saying, hey, I want to do an add-on, and we haven't even talked about how the house is going to look, then all of a sudden you're going like, well, I don't even understand the frame, so I don't know how to do this add-on, even if I even agree that this is a helpful add-on to go into. So it provides that early that early frame, that early sort of mindset to which you can more easily return than figuring it out later and going, oh shoot, we don't even know what we're building. Now we got to retroactively have this conversation. And with personality, they are pros at bending frames. They are pros at it. And so whether it's them bending it or you notice yourself bending that frame, it's a signal that says, hey, you need to pay attention to something. Something's changing. Again, not a good or bad thing. It's just something's changing and you need to tend to it. So tend to it. Be curious about it. So that's the general gist here, the expectations. What is this going to sound like, or what could this look like? Remembering again, relational psychodynamics. So it might sound a little bit different if you're a behaviorist or if you're, a CBT clinician and thinking about incorporating this. I don't know. Or if you're a consumer, this might look and sound different across a lot of different providers that you might see. But here's what I do. I intake paperwork, all this other stuff. I go, okay, I have a general sense of what you want to focus on, but help me understand what brings you to my doorstep today. Or, if I know that there's a past treatment history, if there isn't a past treatment history, I will contextualize these questions, or I'll kind of alter them and say, well, you've been in treatment before. I'm curious what that has looked like or sounded like for you. Or if they haven't been, of like in your mind's eye. I know when you come into therapy for the first time, there's all sorts of possible notions that you have in your head. And I just want to hear, it's not good or bad, just like what do you envision this to be? Now, if they've been in treatment before and they don't spontaneously offer what they liked and didn't like, I'll ask a little bit and say, well, what did you like or not like? Another subtext of what I'll ask or I'll incorporate into what I'm leading to, which is an introduction into my approach, is, was it super directive or was it super exploratory? Do you feel like you really liked or didn't like that they gave you or didn't give you like assignments and things to be working on between sessions? And so I'm just feeling things out. Now, I don't want to lead them too far to give me all this information and then I provide my own approach. It's like completely opposite from what they were expecting. But, it's a lead into like, well, let me share about my relational psychodynamic approach. It allows me to say it's more exploratory in nature, but at the same time, it's really directive. There is an emphasis on the past, but I promise it's also an emphasis on the present. And I'll use metaphors and stuff like that to make that accessible. How is that sounding to you? How are you feeling about that? Now, a lot of clientele are going to agree. In general, they agree to kind of no matter what's in front of them because they're like, look, you're the therapist I found. I want to stick this out. And so they might just acquiesce, but a lot of them will legit agree. And that legit buy-in and investment is super essential and super important for launching off in an intentional way. Now, you have to tend to the frame over time. Just because they agree and they're jiving with you now doesn't mean they're going to jive longitudinally, which is why it's so important we're starting to talk about this first so we can more easily, again, return to it. So after I get that impression and they usually are saying, yeah, sounds good, or they'll say, you know what, if you could add in more kind of to-dos in between sessions or little exercises, that would be helpful for me, but I'm down to explore how this approach goes. Like, great, cool. All of this is leading to the most essential piece of the conversation that I want to get at, and that's the expectations. Like, so I've heard what your preferences are. I've heard what's worked for you and what's not worked for you. But what expectations do you have of therapy and of me? And a lot of folks don't know how to respond to this question. They'll kind of look at me and go, I don't know. I mean, if they offer something like, great, and I'll latch on to like, oh, look at them. They're thinking ahead. They do have a set of expectations. But it's totally normal for a lot of folks, because they haven't had these conversations before, to look at you kind of dumbfounded and be like, you got to help me out here. And I'll oblige, but I want to spontaneously hear from them first before I start offering. So what I will offer is like, well, I'll give you some examples. Say, for example, on like a super concrete side of things, I'm respectful of each other's time, right? Like, we want to be on time and give or take a few minutes. Life happens, traffic happens if they're coming in person. But if one of us is like, we're currently late, we probably should talk about that, right? Yeah, and most people are like, totally. To which I go, well, is there anything else in that kind of concrete side of things that maybe we should talk about? and see what they have to offer. Sometimes they'll bleed into the more abstract, and I'm happy to go there too. But see what they say. There's important things on the list like payments. Now, if payment is offloaded somewhere else, this is less of a pressing issue, but especially if you're collecting yourself, it will affect the frame if someone stops paying you all of a sudden for your services. Another one that I like to add into the mix is doing work between sessions. Now, relational psychodynamic is about bi-directional. It's not just like, I want to hear your expectations so I can tell you what I expect of you. There's bi-directionality here where it's like, I need to be thinking about you before you show up in this chair. Like, I can't just show up and be like, I have no idea what we've been talking about. I'm just, you lead the whole way. I've not thought of a lick about our work together or where you're heading, but it's a vice versa. You need to be doing the same thing. That between sessions, there's times for rest. You can't always be, running on high octane, always thinking about stuff. In fact, I might be prescriptive time to time to like, just rest in the next week. Don't worry about this so much. But if you're never thinking about our work together, we're not going to get very far. Can we mutually agree to this? And that usually people are like, yeah, because the concrete stuff's super accessible. I think most people intuitively understand these sorts of parameters. It leads into the more abstract parameters. And these, I'm realizing I'm saying super and essential a lot in this episode, but this is the core of it, the core of it, especially from a relational psychodynamic standpoint. And that says, so as you heard of my approach, a big piece is like being super direct, even being confrontational at times. And so to me, if they haven't already offered this, of like what do they feel is necessary to achieve that and for that to be beneficial for them, I'll ask them, what does trust look like for you? What is it to feel sufficiently safe? Like, I know I'm a provider and I'm, if I'm licensed, and you can look up my license number. You can send in complaints about me to the, licensing board and stuff like that. But like, on like a more deep level, what does safety look like between you and I? What is it like for me to be able to offer something that could be hurtful or challenging? And what would it be like for you to offer something back to me and say, I don't know about that, or I don't think you get me. I don't think you understand me. I think your background, you can't understand me. Like, ooh, we got to be able to talk about that if we're going to be doing good work, because otherwise we're just hiding that. And then we're just acting with one another, or we're like half present with one another. What does that look like? What does that require out of you? And so, I'll enter into this and help them out and say, well, can we at least agree to aspire to that? Trust and safety is built over time. My promise to you is I'm a transparent person. If you want to know what I'm thinking or feeling, I'm going to let you know, at almost all the time. There will be times I might hold back because I'm being curious about something, but at the end of the day, I will offer something to you. So can we at least both aspire to be transparent with one another and give each other permission to say challenging things to one another in the service of better understanding where we're coming from? Can we agree to talk about aspects of difference if we can do that right now, or we can see if it comes up later? It doesn't matter what the area of difference is. Maybe it won't matter to you, but maybe it's going to be super essential that if I'm, based on my gender, my race, or the fact that I'm not, this, I don't believe in this, or I do or don't have kids, whatever it might be important for us to make that an okay thing to talk about. And this is where people will more reluctantly agree. A lot of folks will straight up agree, and they'll be like, yeah, that's actually kind of cool, and I super appreciate you talking about this. But others are like, yeah, it sounds a little bit weird. I've never really done that before. That sounds a little bit scary, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Which I'm like, great. Remember, though, this is a evolving thing. Like, you and I have to tend to this together. Just because we're talking about it now doesn't mean that we can't and shouldn't talk about it again. In fact, if there's ever something that comes up in this realm of trust or safety or transparency, it's probably the thing we should be talking about first and foremost. So we'll set it now. Glad we agree, but it is a living entity. We will continue to tend to it cooperatively over time. So I really enjoy these conversations. I feel like I get a glimpse into how my clients are working and how they kind of encounter these topics real quick and real sudden. And I think it's very helpful in the sense of like equity. But you have to be prepared if you're a provider offering this. You have to be prepared to actually enter into this frame. Do not be offering something to which you will not agree to or actually follow through with. If you're like trust and transparency and then you're not transparent, then you are violating the frame. So you have to know yourself well enough as a provider to offer these things to a client. Because if you can't follow through, don't offer it. It's aspirational indeed, but you need to be able to at least approach that aspiration if you're going to offer it. And there's also danger in this too. I think this is where a lot of providers are more conservative, and rightfully so, because when you don't offer laterality, when you don't offer transparency, it's easier to not get into conflict and thereby save your skin and not worry about negative reviews or whatever it might be. Or at least there's the perception of that. You'll still get negative reviews. They just won't ever talk to your face about the challenges that they're having. And so there is safety in the sense of like not having conflictual or like reflecting things that are challenging, of like, I'm having a hard time believing you right now. Like, you're like offering that to a client, like it doesn't feel, I'm not connecting with what you're saying. They could go online and be like, this person said I'm full and lying, and they don't, they could do whatever they want. And so there is safety in not taking this approach. But at what cost? At what cost are we, what costs are we willing to incur in this profession by playing it safe? Psychology is not if we're doing especially depth work or personality work, it's not inherently safe. That's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of interacting with strangers. Even if we ourselves are the professionals in the room, we have to have parameters and sort of a framework or kind of guidelines or rules for engagement. Otherwise, we're leaving it all to chance, and we might not be doing the type of work that we want to achieve, and our clients might not be getting the type of help that they really need and want if we're always playing it safe. So that is the essence of framing, the expectations. How do we have open, transparent conversations at the front end, and then how do we keep those conversations going longitudinally as we continue in our work together to make sure we're doing good work, that we're not just leaving this to chance, and we're not just leaving it to the bravery of ourselves or the bravery of the folks that we're meeting with to enter into these conversations. Give permission early, repeatedly give permission and reapproach throughout the course of your work. And by and large, I think it helps optimize outcomes. It won't always be perfect. Therapist match matters, all this stuff. It's not always super successful. That's not the nature of the beast. We're just trying to amplify the likelihood of success by tending to as we say in our research, the common factors, the latent variables underneath the clinical work itself that will often make or break successful intervention. So, hope this has been interesting. Again, look for, if you're curious about on the leadership side, there's going to be lots of common themes between these two, but if you want to look for that episode, by all means, please do. Otherwise, hope it's helpful, and as always, stay curious.